Hi there, and welcome to another interview, which is a companion piece to a previous interview. I had a guest on called Eddie, who you might have seen that video, and he is a genius, in my opinion. And I do think that this person is going to be one of the biggest things on the internet. I really do. So you've got to go over to his website and his YouTube, subscribe, and everything, and do all that sort of stuff. But his interest in his own journey, as I think, looking at his videos, got him to look at everything across the board. So, Eddie, thank you, and welcome to part two. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the channel again. I'm good. How are you?
I'm really pleased to have you back so quickly, and I think one of the things that I've learnt is it's really good when a human can admit they've made mistakes, and that's me. I feel I'm getting better at interviewing now, and for the people that know, I tend to do 45-minute interviews. I don't think that's going to happen because I'm a bit more interested in getting into the weeds. I was scared of doing that because I thought it might switch people off. But so many people give me messages to say, oh, I'd like to know more, I'd like to know more. And I'm doing so many companion pieces. Here we are, right? Enough of me waffling. So, Eddie, there was a few things I wanted to sort of clear up from your first interview. People watching now, you don't have to see the first interview. Of course, it would make more sense, but this is a self-contained bit. You had a few symptoms and some problems growing up with some illnesses. And I wanted you to just sort of just clarify those things, and then we'll expand on it. Just sort of name check everything that you'd gone through, and then we'll just talk about each one individually.
Yeah, so the most serious symptoms, because it would take forever for me to list all of the ones that I experienced. The most serious one was that I would have pain when experiencing any emotion, whether it be subtle or extreme, and whether it be positive or negative. It would actively cripple me in the moment. It would leave me keeled over in pain, and I would have to sit down or lie down on the floor, not a bed, because the bed there was too much give in a bed. That, and then also something directly related to that. Which people may not think is completely related, but it's basically extreme POTS symptoms whenever I would go from a standing position to, or from a sitting position to a standing position. I would have blood pressure swings and mainly an elevated pulse rate, and therefore lack of breath, and breathing difficulties as well. And then I had some muscle twitching everywhere, basically, joint pain as well. That was more so a stinging pain that I had, and also just overall shifting in my bones and everything like that in my joints. I felt like I was a set of Legos that weren't completely put together, like someone, or like a bag of ice that you crush with your fist before you open it. I just felt like I was, I wasn't stable, I had a lot of instability going on. So those were the main symptoms. I think if there's any more that I had listed in the previous interview that you'd like me to expound upon and, repeat, then I can do that too. But that's where my train of thought's going right now.
Yeah, well, I took copious notes, which is really good to go back to. So you said POTS, Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome, which is a posh way of saying when you go from standing to sitting, changes your heart rate. And I think I think if they still do this test the same, they put you on a tilt table or something, don't they? If that's right. How do they test
Yes,
it?
that was so they actually, it was so severe that they didn't even have to diagnose it that way. Because I didn't have that test, but they still do it that way because I've heard other people that I know that have also had POTS testing done, and they've had to do it the same way. Mine was more so all they had to do was a heart rate variability test on me, which was from a standing to sitting, and they did that also even whenever I was just sitting, and then they would tilt my neck to see if it changed depending on neck positioning as well. But they depended on heart rate variability. Yeah.
So how have you sort of managed that? What's happened? Do you still suffer from that, or is it something that's gone?
I don't suffer from that anymore, fortunately. The only thing that still happens if I go from a sitting to standing position is depending on where my bones are at the time, which I can adjust myself. Then I'll get headaches in the back of my head going up into the top of my head, like from the back of my neck all the way into the top of my head. But I wouldn't, that's not POTS because the heart rate doesn't really change any more than a normal person's changes, and blood pressure as well whenever I go from sitting to standing. It's just more so to do with the fact that now there's more pressure on me when I stand up, and depending on the positioning of my bones at that moment, that can affect if I have a headache, like a pulsating headache. And that has to do with, I think that has to do with impingement on the surrounding arteries, because that'll cause increased intracranial pressure and stuff like that, which they've measured in me before. So,
but that was one of the things that I remember from the first interview, because you have a thing called CCI, I believe. What was that?
Yeah. So the CCI was what I was first diagnosed with, which is Cranio-Cervical Instability, and it sounds like a really meretricious name and all that stuff, and it sort of is, because how the medical terminology is, but really when you break it down, it's pretty simple. It's just instability of the ligaments which are what hold bone to bone in your body, in the ligaments in your cervical spine, so basically your neck, leading up to the cranium. And so that will cause, the bones to move around too much, and too much can mean even just a few millimeters, depending on who you are, or even just one. And that can be enough to cause symptoms, which is basically just impingement and later on degeneration, if it doesn't surcease at all, of nerves and arteries. Mainly the nerves is what degenerates. The arteries don't degenerate, but they will still continue to be impinged on. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said about your POTS there, you can move your bones around. So are we assuming that your joints still aren't as stable as you would like?
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever I first arrived at the clinic and they had just looked at my neck, because I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So cranio-cervical instability I have, but then it affects my whole body. That phenomenon affects my whole body. So in effect, I actually have hypermobile EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I mean, there's different manifestations of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's always an underlying connective tissue disorder. In terms of, yes, so whenever I arrived at the clinic and they just looked at my neck, I was already top 10% of their cases. Later on, when they realized that it was affecting all of my body, and I have effectively hypermobile EDS, they never explicitly said this, but given the way that they treat me and the fact that I've stayed after close at their clinic, and they've stayed overtime for me to treat me, I'm at least higher than, well, lower, I guess, than 10%. I'm in the top, I'm in the single digit percentage points. And so given that fact, despite the amount of treatments I've gotten, it has improved me every single step of the way. I've, had commensurate improvement. I've been proportional improvement. The problem is that since I am such a severe case, it's taking even longer to get full stability of my joints than it otherwise would for someone else I've seen many instances of people going there and they've only had to get 2 treatments on their knee or something, and then they're fixed. For me, that's not the case. I've had multiple treatments on my knees and they're still pretty unstable, but again, proportionally stable in response to the treatments. So, yeah.
So what's causing it to be so extreme for you?
We have no idea. So whenever they are confronted with, or whenever they encounter a patient, or rather the other way around, they'll ask them the questions like, hey, have you had any trauma to the area concerned? And a lot of times that can be the result of it. Like if you were in a car wreck, we know that your neck will go into whiplash. You'll completely change the structure of your neck. It doesn't necessarily damage the ligaments in the neck, but that usually coincides with it, especially if the trauma was severe enough. And a lot of people have had just trauma to their ligaments. The other thing that they'll look at is the age of the person. Like, oh, do you have arthritis? Because arthritis is associated with if they look at the ligaments in the joint concerned that is is having pain. They can see changes in the structure of the ligaments a lot of times. It's a thinning. It usually looks like thin ligaments. And so then they go, okay, well, and then they say, oh, okay, the cause is arthritis. But then you look into the cause of arthritis and it's sort of ambiguous in the medical sphere. So that's not a direct explicit cause, it's not an exact mechanism. The other thing that they'll say is that sometimes it's just genetics. Genetically you are predisposed to having weaker connective tissue in general. Many people that hear Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, they might think of, if they recognize it at all, they might think of stretchy skin, because that's one of the manifestations of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have naturally more stretchy skin than other people, but that's not the problem. I don't have I'm not more predisposed to developing lesions or anything on my skin in response to rubbing or anything like that, or abrasion. It is more so mine is the hypermobility aspect of it. Mine's the ligaments. But whenever I look in my family, no one in my family line, maternal or paternal, have any predispositions to that, any experiences, any reported symptomology that ties directly into hypermobility of ligaments. They don't have any of that. It does not preclude the possibility that it is still genetic, because genetics are you can't they're not predictable. They're pretty ineffable. So I think more so, I've talked about this before, when you look at what genes are in the first place, genes are responsible for encoding for the production of a certain protein and nothing else. And that means that they can either be upregulated, downregulated, or somewhere in between in terms of the rate at which they do that. If it is genetic, a lot of people think you have no control over that. And to some extent, you're right. If we did have complete control over our genes, then we would be able to, given certain stimuli, look exactly like the next person, like that. But that's not the case. But you do have a lot more control than the medical establishment wants you to believe. For example, like with cancer. And I know that it sounds like we're getting into irrelevant territory, but since my condition, I think, is genetic, I'd like to talk about, what I think may have been the cause of it. In order to do that, I kind of have to elucidate this. So, with cancer, there's been about 10 or 11 oncogenes, that they call them, that are invariably associated with cancer manifestation. And I don't know if it's that they have to be turned off or turned on, or, activated or deactivated, but that means that people that exhibit those genes, yes, they may have a genetic predisposition to developing cancer given certain stimuli, but that doesn't mean that necessarily they'll develop the condition, because they can be activated or deactivated depending on the environment in which you place them. Part of that environment being the diet you eat, which is where that ties into all the other stuff that I talk about. But given that fact, I thought about, okay, well, what were some things that I was doing that may have caused this? Well, whenever I was growing up, I didn't eat that much meat at all. When you talk about connective tissue, you're talking about collagen, and collagen you only derive synthesized bioavailable collagen from animal products, mainly meat with, connective tissue in it. You can synthesize collagen yourself in your body, but you can also do that with cholesterol, right? But it doesn't seem like the body does that at a significant rate, and at a sufficient rate, at least, to thrive, to get to where it actually wants to be. My first hamburger, for example, my first bit of actual beef that I ate was whenever I was 10 years old at a Mexican restaurant, because I didn't want any Mexican food. I had them give me the American cheeseburger off the kids menu, and I had about one or two bites of it. This is the degree that we're talking about, and this is completely hypothetical. This is complete theory, and I've never said otherwise. But I never had any meat. I would have a hot dog here and there, because that's a kid's meat, But anytime that I would have meat, it would also be usually in a bowl of rice, which we know has nutrients, anti-nutrients that will inhibit nutrient absorption in the first place. Not exactly collagen per se, but who's to say that it couldn't have interfered with other things that were responsible for collagen synthesis even? Again, this is all theory. But yes, I am aware of the fact that other people my age were also doing the same thing. I'm not an anomaly in that respect. Every child that grew up alongside me in this area did the same things that I did. But I think maybe I did have a genetic predisposition to developing that condition, and I didn't help the case that I had, a stimulus that was, a diet that was completely bereft of adequate nutrition, first of all, and also could have just been replete with things that could have inhibited nutrient absorption and inhibited my body's natural ability to even synthesize sufficient collagen for my needs in the first place. It's completely theoretical. I'm not claiming causality. You can't do that anyway. So it's just my theory. And if it's not, and it's completely just anomalous and it just happened in me, then, so be it. But That's the only prevailing theory in my head, because I don't know anything else that could have resulted in that condition. I never experienced any trauma. I wasn't someone that engaged in a lot of sports activity at all. I was a complete nerd in high school and junior high. Um, that wasn't the case. And I never had, a car accident or something. So, none of that fits the model there.
Could it be anything to do with emotional situations? I mean, I think you told me your mother and father split up. Could it be anything to do with that sort of stress?
No, they split up, and it was completely civil. They both agreed on it, and it was whenever I was 2 years old. So I didn't even remember that. Yeah, so I've pretty much been growing up with split custody the whole time, and yeah.
I thought I'd ask that because people might watch that first interview and thought, well, he didn't ask that question. So eating this way, getting the nutrients in and avoiding anti-nutrients, has that been helpful? Have you seen quite a step change?
Yeah, I have. But the funny thing, and I think this is pretty interesting to talk about, is I didn't see it immediately. And I didn't even see it within a few months because of the fact that I was undergoing so much intensive treatment. So I had shifted my diet over from, if people have watched the last interview, they'll know that I was on the Dr. Gundry diet, the lectin-free diet. And then I was on a more Dave Asprey rendition of it, where it was same thing, lectin-free, all the appropriate plant foods, except I would add in more animal protein than was recommended by Dr. Gundry. And then I shifted over to Paul Saladino's diet for a month. Didn't have good experiences on that. It was like the other two diets, I wasn't at my full potential, and I know that now. But the Paul Saladino fruit and honey diet was the one that I actually had active bad experiences with. Mm. Then I shifted over to the carnivore diet after discovering Bart K. And I remember I was reflecting after the interview. I was like, I didn't really do a good job of actually explaining that. I shifted over to that diet, and I didn't feel bad at all. And in fact, I felt quite good. But it was really, really hard to tell because I was still having extreme symptoms of my condition and also undergoing the treatments that would make the symptoms even worse. So what I do remember, though, is when I first started the diet, so for people that don't know this, I'm 5'11", so I'm 5 feet, 11 inches. And, depending on the viewer, I don't know if they know, I'd have to convert that. I think it's about 1.72 meters, maybe I'm getting completely wrong. Yeah. And with that, I was 135 pounds. And so I was very skinny. During that time, though, when I started carnivore, I was eating about 2 steaks that were a pound each, or I was eating 2 pounds of ground beef. So, same issue there. About 2 sticks of butter and 4 eggs every single day. And for months, I was doing that. I felt like I couldn't get enough food in, right? And a lot of people actually have that experience. Where they're like, I'm just eating a ton. Like I have this voracious appetite. And I was one of those people too. But I maintained 135 pounds with no activity level at all. Like I was doing nothing because I couldn't do anything. And I did that for months. I was 135 pounds. So I had a huge appetite. And the only thing that tells me is why, my body is burning through this, and not exactly burning through it, but it's using a lot of things that it was missing. That's what I believe was going on. If I had flare-ups during that time, my appetite would increase even more for fat particularly. And I think maybe that had to do with, my neurons being damaged and, the cholesterol makes it the myelin sheathing. So, I thought, well, again, it's theoretical. What I do know is, every time I'd have a flare-up, it was associated with an increased appetite. And so, but later down the line, I was strict, like no carbohydrate for 1 year. And then what happened is, I continued to heal up during this time. And then Christmas of 2023 occurred. And, with all the junk food around you at Christmas in December, I was like, you know what? I haven't had carbohydrates in a long time. And I want to see what will happen if I have some. Now, I didn't like binge, I didn't even get up to 100 grams ever during this time period. It was around like 60 maximum on a day. But the problem was it wasn't even like carbohydrates that people consider to be the most innocuous or benign. It was like I was having like Reese's cups, you know. It wasn't good. It wasn't good stuff. So it wasn't just carbs, it was seed oils too. And I was having that with all of the other stuff that I was having, and blood pressure increase after that. It wasn't completely immediate, but it was like an hour or two afterwards. You know, I could tell that it was up, and I was like, I've never had that experience in response to, you know, carbohydrates before, I don't think. And so this gets to my point that the immediate transition, I didn't notice extreme changes. But once I started to reintroduce things just to see what would happen, that's whenever I was like, oh, you know, no, it sucked, because at the time I was like, you know, I know that this was going to happen. I knew that this was going to happen given what I know, but it doesn't fail to frustrate me every time that it does. You know, like I know it's going to happen, but every time I'm like, damn, you know, like great. But it didn't stop. It was during that entire Christmas period, and I was like, you know, New Year's resolution, I'll stop doing it. And I did stop doing it. And it was mainly because I was, given the fact that I have been injured and actually have had a serious condition, I am more careful with that stuff. I'm like more scared about doing that stuff, you know, than other people that haven't had that problem before. Even though my condition isn't directly related to diet, you know, it's still like I have a condition, so I don't want to make it worse with that. Which is one of the reasons I never binged. You know, I never had like a piece of pie or something during that period. It was just like the tiny, you know, snacks here and there. Before that though, I also started introducing like, oh, you know, let's see if I can get away with pepperoni or like salami, the stuff that's considered to be not the most optimal meat, but still meat. And even those actually gave me slight issues, I noticed. Pepperoni, because of the spices, they'll put spices in the pepperoni, and it's like typical, you know. And I think that that's what that was. I'm reducing it to that, I think. And then, you know, dairy I tried a little bit of, and that's the thing that was the most difficult for me to give up. I think I'm pretty contentious in the carnivore space with the whole, you know, not exactly anti-dairy. I tell people, you know, if dairy is fine for you to eat and consume and you don't have any symptoms, like it is an animal product and it's very congruous with the fatty acid and protein profiles of other animal foods. So that's fine. But I always tell people, I'm like, you know, a really great way of overeating food, for example, is combining it with a bunch of carbs or putting a ton of cheese on it. You know, like it's really easy to overdo stuff with dairy because it's addictive because of the morphine in it, I believe. And also dairy has a lot of, sometimes depending on the dairy you get, has a lot of carbohydrates in it. So I think that it's pretty prudent to be careful with that. And then also, it seems to just cause inflammation by other means. I think the casein protein for many people is a problem. And so there's a lot of things. And you also have to consider the fact that we've only been consuming it for just as long as we've been consuming plants in any significant amount, because it was right around the agricultural revolution that we started to domesticate animals. But that was the last thing that I was able to give up. And I've been doing that quite well. I have once a week now. I will have some, I think it's a cup of heavy cream used to make ice cream. And I'll have that once a week. And even then I'm trying to cut that down to half a cup. So, anyway, yeah. So my experience with carnivore with respect to healing has been great. It wasn't immediate, but it was something that every single time I introduce any plant material, even things like chocolate now that has some fiber in it, bloating immediately. Like that is immediate. That's like within, or acid reflux I'll have after consuming a square or two of chocolate that has no sugar in it. It's the Lily's chocolate, I think, is like stevia in it. Because my girlfriend, she has less of a problem with this stuff, so she experiments with it more. She has it more often, but she makes sure she gets the artificial the stevia in there and the erythritol. Well, as soon as I have that, it's like acid reflux and bloating for hours. It'll wake me up in the middle of the night sometimes, the acid reflux. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the beginning, and thanks for the answer, that was great. You mentioned at the beginning of that you were also having treatments. So what are the treatments?
Yeah, so my treatments are completely regenerative. They're not anything that is too invasive per se. I mean, in terms of the solution, they're actually very invasive in terms of what the treatments entail. Basically, the treatments are a combination of prolotherapy, which is a proliferative treatment. And we were talking about that before we started recording. And it's also platelet-rich plasma, which people may know as PRP. So it's a combination of those two. And basically what those are is, I'll start with prolotherapy because the solution is simpler. So the prolotherapy involves taking a syringe, and it has a solution of water, sugar in the form of dextrose, I believe, and a plant compound that promotes inflammation. And I said this in the last interview, leave it to a plant to promote inflammation in an area, right? And then also, I think there's one more thing, which may function as a slight numbing agent. I'm not sure. I definitely know they don't numb you beforehand. So that if they put one in the solution, then that's different. But anyway, that being said, what they do is they fill it up. They fill the syringes up with that, and then it's quite a long needle, and they inject it into the injured area, they call it the injured ligament. In my case, they don't seem to be injured. They're just that way. They're just weak. And it will cause proliferation of that tissue. So it will cause inflammation in that area. And so that means that the therapy utilizes and recruits, really is probably the better word, your own innate and intrinsic healing ability by your body. It initiates inflammation of that area, concentrates it to that area, and causes proliferation of that ligament. So it rebuilds it slowly builds up that that ligament up to where it should be in order to actually provide enough stability of that joint. So that is what that treatment does. PRP is the exact same as that, except the solution is different. Basically what they do is they take your blood, and they take quite a bit of it, and then they'll spin it twice to concentrate the healing elements out of it. And then they will put that into the syringe, and then they will inject it into the injured area. In my experience, PRP has been more effective. It hurts more when you're getting it, which is interesting to note, but it does seem to cause greater healing, just from my experience. It's associated with that. So those are the treatments. I've gotten a lot of them. I think we're approaching about 40 now total. And those are sets of treatment. We're not talking about 40 injections. Each treatment involves, in my case at least, over 100 injections at once. I am now shrinking that down, because now that I'm getting better, I don't need as much treatment at once. And also, if you get more treatment than your body can sort of handle, it dilutes the healing. If it's across a greater area, it dilutes the increase in stability, I've noticed. If you concentrate it and isolate it to one area more, then that area will heal more than all the rest, which kind of makes sense anyway. But yeah, every single treatment I get is over 100 injections usually. At least that's been the case. Sometimes some have been less, but yes, every single time. So we're talking hundreds of injections I've gotten, and yeah, that's been over the course of since April of 2022, and the last treatment I received was I think in January of this year. I think so. Maybe no, it was after February of this year. So either way, yeah, and it was just, there's breaks here and there has to be. Yeah, I mean, they tell you that you can only get treatment again in the same area after 2 weeks of having received treatment in that area and healed up. I was doing that for a minute, and actually, I was just trying to expedite. My thought process was, I'm so desperate to really just get back out there in the world and be normal. So after 2 weeks, I'm heading back in there and getting it again, until eventually, it was really catching up to me, because they were taking my blood pressure, and every single time it was just going up, 160 over 80 at one point. And I was like, I am really inflamed. I'm not giving my body enough time to really calm down from this. And it was really frustrating, because I will go through as much pain as it takes to get to the end goal. But, it was really frustrating that I had to wait months, but now that I have this stuff going on, it's been really helping me, that I just feel like I'm doing something. That's really what I was chasing at that point. I hate the feeling of just feeling like I am a wet blanket, I'm not doing anything. And now that I actually have an occupation, that has been really, really helping me. And the fact that I'm able to actually engage in some resistance training at least once a week. which is really, that's been helping a lot. It makes me feel like I'm normal, but it's more so the reason why it's helping me so much is it makes me feel like I'm providing, I'm productive in society, you know?
Yeah. And
So,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, when you first have the injections, do you have a period of time where it hurts a lot, or do you feel super charged up? What's the feeling once you've had that treatment and
Right.
you're walking out and you've had it?
Yeah. So every single time, invariably, what will happen is during the treatments, I said this in the last interview, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, as much as I really do think that if people are dealing with situations like this or symptoms like this, they should absolutely consider this treatment if they have the funds to, you know, fund the treatment, but also the traveling because it's in Florida. They should absolutely consider that treatment. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. The treatments during it, it's the worst pain that I've had to experience. It is, and I hate to say it. I wish it weren't the case, but it is the case. The nurses in there and also the two physicians, the doctors that will actually administer the treatments are really, really, really good in this clinic of making you feel extremely comfortable. They will talk to you during the treatments like nothing's going on, which may seem like, not appropriate, but actually that's the one thing that you kind of, in many cases, want. And they completely understand if you can't answer a question when they ask you a question when they're doing the treatments. It's like, it's okay, it's fine. But during the treatments, it sucks. You will have inflammation. You'll have swelling of the area immediately. But swelling functions as a splint. That's what it does. And so after the treatment, they'll give you heating pads immediately. They'll put the heated pillows, like over you or under you, or both, depending on if you got treatments on both areas, like I've had to do before. And they'll give you about 20 or 30 minutes, however much time you need actually, to lie on that table and recover. They also will give you breaks in between the treatments too, if you need them. They will have, they'll give you the stress balls, which at first I think my pride was getting in the way, and I was like, I don't need those. No, I'll grab one now. I'll be like, nah, I need to grab onto something when it's happening. And then, they'll take they'll take as many breaks as you need. And then you lie down for however long you need afterwards as well. And then if you need a wheelchair out, they'll give you those. Even if you didn't get, your legs treated or anything like that. My ribs I've had treated for so long. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't really want to walk out there. I just want to like get wheeled out to the car. So they'll provide that for you as well. The whole atmosphere is really, really, really comforting, and it's really hospitable. They make sure to make it feel like that. So anyway, after, when you get up off the table, since the inflammation and the swelling functions as a splint, you have immediate stability. So if you have any symptoms that you went in beforehand that were a direct result of the instability of that area, those symptoms will immediately dissipate. Like you won't have them anymore when you're standing up, and you don't even have to use your muscles to keep yourself upright. Like in my case, I keep thinking of my ribs because that's the most salient area of my issues, and also the one that I've gotten treated the most. I usually have to have like really good posture with my ribs still, since there's still some instability. I have to like focus on recruiting the muscles. After treatments, I can like I can try to relax those muscles as much as possible, but I'm fully upright more than I ever am. And so it's like, wow, and then I'll have immediate changes in like the way that my stomach is moving. And a lot of times, one of the symptoms I've had, and I didn't say this before, and it still affects me, is it's on the right side of my ribs, since they're pretty unstable. And when we're talking about ribs, we're not just talking about the front, we're talking about the thoracic spine, where they join, to join the ribs to the spine. Correspond. That's the word I was looking for. Basically, they are still a little loose, quite a bit, actually. And so what will happen is, since all of your, appetite regulation nerves and all that stuff is also there, I will feel like I'm starving when I have just eaten, which is, that's a form of torture in and of itself. I'm like it's happened before where I eat when I know that I am not hungry, because I tell myself for 30 minutes I'm not hungry. It's my ribs, and I can tell because if I put my hand here, it'll go away. But I can't do that forever. And so for as long as I feel that, that symptom, I'm like, okay, well, I'll go ahead and eat food. Well, that will start to change after I've received treatment. Like I can tell, like, I can tell exactly where my stomach is being impinged on, or at least the nerves that are affecting my stomach are being impinged on, because then they stop being impinged on and my stomach is able to move away from that area, and it's moving, and I'm like, that is exactly where I feel hunger all the time, but it's not, it's subsiding. So I experience, improvements immediately, despite the fact that I have extreme pain on the superficial parts, where my skin is still, because of the needles and stuff. Within about, for me at least, it depends on how fast you heal from this stuff. Within about 3 days, it'll start to significantly subside to the point where, you'll start to experience the normal symptoms again. Now, that may sound discouraging to people because they may think, well, the treatment's supposed to heal you, right? Yes, it is. But I explained this in the previous interview where you have, basically, let's say you're like right here. After the treatment, you go up to like right here in terms of improvement level. And then slowly you start to come back down. But your resting point when you come back down fully is still higher than you were before. It's that's the theme. You're like climbing up a ladder, right? And so depending on how fast you heal and depending on how severe your condition is, it may take a lot longer. So I want to emphasize to people, like, I am an extreme case. So me receiving this many treatments and still not being fully fixed, that is not representative of the majority of the population. That is not representative of that. I've seen interviews, people can refer to the Caring Medical YouTube page, for example, where they interview people all the time, and they'll tell you that they received 2 treatments on an area and they're completely fixed. So that I don't want people to be discouraged and think that they have to go through that much pain all the time, all throughout their body to fix an issue. This is me. I'm sharing my experience of someone that has extreme EDS. So I want to emphasize that if people are feeling despondent about it or something.
Yeah. And so essentially what it's doing is building up ligaments and tendons and joint fluid. Is that basically what's happening? This resting point, could you see that has happened? Is there imaging as well to prove that's happened?
Yeah. So they will do, I think it's after about 4 treatments, maybe 3, they will rerun diagnostic tests to see improvement. And, they do a DMX, digital motion X-ray. And they now very recently they have a DMX now for the whole body, not just your neck. So it's really cool. You can actually see in live motion, even just your rib ligaments and your ribs moving around on that to assess the range of, laxity, let's say, or the degree of it. They'll run all of the neurological tests on you again, like they do heart rate variability, which isn't exactly a neurological test, but it can be indicative of neurological disturbances, because what they'll do is, I was just referencing this, they'll sit you down and they'll tell you to move your neck around, and they'll measure your heart rate variability depending on positions of your neck. And they can change depending on the position of your neck, and that gives them a good idea of, how much of the structures of your body are interfering with the vagus nerves, for example. And they'll do that with ultrasound, they'll do an ultrasound on like parts of your like internal jugular vein. For example, I think it was my left one. I'll have to look at my chart again. It's been a long time. When I first arrived at the clinic, they did one on my internal jugular veins, and one of them was completely closed, like 0, whenever I was in a certain position, like normal, like positioning like that. And that can interfere with your ability for your brain to drain fluid. And so they would tell me beforehand, like, you should take a minute once every hour or something. You should lie down on the ground and, like maybe, how do I explain this? Like lie on your bed with your head hanging off for a minute and just let the fluids drain. But now we're not to that degree. But yes, they run those tests again and they can see improvements. And they've seen improvements with even the diameter of my vagus nerve. They will measure the diameter of it to gauge regenerative progress. And mine have regenerated, actually. When I went in, they were very, very thin and weak, and then now they're much larger. So that's one thing that I want to say. Yes, they will rerun the diagnostic tests. Of course, at the end of the day, even before the diagnostic tests, the patient will anecdotally tell you, like, hey, this is working. I can tell because I'm able to do this and this and this. And it's much more than a placebo, especially when you're talking about, being able to walk That's not really a placebo effect to, get up and start walking whenever you haven't been able to walk. So there's that. But also, I'm really glad that you just mentioned this because I completely forgot about this. Tendons. Yeah, because tendons are made up of collagen as well. What they'll do also sometimes, this therapy is primarily for the ligaments, but sometimes they'll try. It's ultrasound guided whenever they do these injections. So they find the area and then they'll inject. Sometimes they'll actually purposely try to hit with the needle a tendon as well, because the tendons will affect the stability of that area as well. The proliferative part of prolotherapy can also help rebuild tendons to some degree, but it's, again, primarily for the ligaments. However, there used to be a chiropractor that worked in that clinic. Now they're separate because it was too difficult to schedule chiropractic appointments and prolotherapy appointments in the same clinic. But he's about 3 minutes away from the clinic. And he employs this really, really effective treatment as well, which is dry needling, which many people have heard of dry needling, and I've had dry needling done, and there's two different types. I've had both types done. One of them is the really superficial type, where you put needles about very, very slightly into an area. Now that can affect the muscle, contraction level, I guess you could say, to some degree. I've noticed that it does that. I'll have immediately, responses like twitching, and then within like an hour or two, it'll revert back to where it was before. There is dry needling that this guy, I'll name Dr. Hutchison, Dr. Brian Hutchison, who is also on YouTube, I believe. He employs this method where the dry needling goes directly, he uses acupuncture needles, and it goes directly into the tendon. Like he will go directly into the muscle. And what he does is he grabs that needle and it's called vertical pecking, where you will peck the tendon throughout the whole range of the needle that, without drawing any blood, by the way. You take the needle out and there's no blood on the needle. So he hasn't punctured any vessels or anything like that. But he goes directly to the tendon, and you will have immediate responses. Wherever that tendon is connected, whatever muscle is connected to that tendon and vice versa, that whole thing will start twitching and spasming if you have an issue. And what it does is that causes proliferation of the tendon as well. It will rebuild the tendon over time, but via the same mechanism. You cause increased blood flow to the tendon that it otherwise isn't really receiving, and that will cause inflammation to that area. So you'll have soreness. You'll feel like you worked out or something, even though the muscle itself is not sore, like it's not fatigued at all. You can work it out, and you have no fatigue, but it feels like it's sore because the tendons are sore. And I've had immense progress and improvement with that as well. So combining that, whenever I was receiving it, I was like, wow, now that I've received dry needling in this area, it feels like I need far less prolotherapy to fully heal up that area than I otherwise thought when I wasn't receiving this. And it was like, yeah, it works. If you look up on Science Direct vertical pecking or something like that, you may find results talking about chiropractic acupunctural dry needling like that. You just have to make sure that the dry needling is actually done properly in that area, not superficial dry needling, but really thorough, direct tendon dry needling. And also it helps that the chiropractor has been doing it for a long time. Dr. Hutchison does it on himself all the time. So he practices on himself. I think that is also I'm glad that you brought it up, because tendons are a big part of the stability aspect of the whole body as well, and they do focus on the significance of tendons as well. So if you combine prolotherapy and PRP with dry needling, if you need to, again, I'm a severe case, so that's might be why I need to do both a lot. Dry needling is a really good way of doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just speaking to the converted, because I am qualified in dry needling, and I do medical. Yeah, and it's one of those things. People are surprised. You can get, if you do the superficial, actually, you can get a little bit of blood, but that's always capillary. And you can do it correctly. I mean, I loved doing it, and I great results with it, but the restrictions stopped that. And I think, I don't want to bore people with my story too much, but when the restrictions came in, which are ludicrous, I lost 90% of my income, and I used to do osteopathic spinal manipulation, cavitations, and dry needling, or as we call it, medical acupuncture here. And for people that think it's a bit woo-woo, there's tons of science behind it. There are even people using acupuncture before surgery rather than being knocked out. I mean, they can do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I used to tell people about, we want the twitch response. I'm actually coming to another question now, Eddie. It will make sense. And they were like, what does that mean? Well, basically, it's your body is going to do a response to this injury. I mean, we're putting some injury.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to now ask you about the injections, because you said literally there are no active ingredients in there. So saline, sugar. Yeah, there is an anesthetic effect to it and something to promote inflammation. I'm assuming, you're going to answer this the way I'm assuming, is that what it's doing is eliciting your body to do the healing. It's not what's in the injection. It's what happens because you've had the injection. Would that be right?
Yes. In fact, I was just saying, I think you were alluding to something that I said before we started recording. The needle itself, if there were no solution in the needle, if you use the needle and you made contact with the ligament, or even like I said, the tendon, you will stimulate healing already, because you are causing, an aggravation to the body, and it will respond to that aggravation. And that's one of the reasons why this therapy is so great, in my opinion, is because a lot of people may think that it's just like, on the surface, they may think immediately like, oh, that's just like any other invasive medical procedure, except it's not, because the entire procedure is is recruiting your body to heal itself. And so the solution is just there to be an enhancer, I like to think of it as. Because when you take like PRP, for example, and you concentrate the healing elements out of your blood, you're taking immune cells and you're infusing them in there to further the healing even more. But at the end of the day, you are still causing the inflammation of the ligament with the needle first, right? So
Yes.
that's the whole purpose of the therapy. And so, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it is absolutely, that's why I think that it is amazing therapy, because it's sort of weird how, it sounds really sophisticated when you talk about it, and then in reality, it just comes full circle back to the body as the best healer of itself, like,
Yeah.
than anything else.
The thing I found, and people couldn't really get that. And my best analogy was, look, if you're opened up in surgery, stitches do not fix your skin. It's not the stitches that fixes your skin together.
Right. Yeah.
It's the skin. The stitches just allow that to happen. Just brings them closer together to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things. A lot of the treatments that you're talking about, it's amazing what you went through, and you've ended up this sort of very logical, clear-headed person, because just having pain from emotions, to me, sounds like a hellish existence. So I want to go full circle now, because that's how you started. Do you still get that, or does it have to be in a very extreme emotion now to elicit a pain?
Actually, both. So yes, I still get it, but it has to be a very significant emotion, and it also has to be whenever I am in a weird position, which is one of the reasons why I know that it's from my ribs. So if anyone's wondering, if they haven't watched the original, the first part of this, whenever I started receiving treatment on my ribs, that's whenever those symptoms started to go away. So, and which makes sense afterwards, after the fact. I was like, oh, well, duh, because all of your fight or flight nerves and your emotion nerves are in your thoracic cavity, all of it, and also whenever you have like when your heart drops or something, that's an actual sensation where your diaphragm is contracting, and my ribs weren't maintaining their position whenever that was happening. So every single time that would happen, that would cause issues. So yes, it has to be a very significant emotion, and it also has to, if it's on a bad day where maybe I slept wrong or something, then it'll also be an issue. It's kind of funny, because it really, really sucks in a way that many people might not think. For example, if anyone's watched my channel, they know that I'm a completely different person on the channel, or I'm just like, I'm not the I'd like to think that I'm an amiable person off the main channel. I'm not that type of person on the channel. But the thing is I'm very, very pugilistic. I'm very, like, what's the word that I'm trying to think of?
A
I
fighter?
stimulate. I stimulate. I'm controversial. I'm controversial. Yeah, yeah. That's yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so what happens is a lot of people would like to debate me. And the thing is I'm like, okay, great. I go into it and I'm like, okay, great. Let's debate. And then what happens is I'll wake up on a bad day and I'll be like, okay, well, this debate is a debate, so it's going to be very tense. But you know what happens is if it's really tense and it's on a bad day, my symptoms start flaring up and then it interferes with my ability to think well. And I'm like, oh, it's going to interfere with my performance. And so I have to be very careful if I say, okay, well, yeah, I'm down to like do debates or I'm down to debate someone or something. Then I have to make sure that I like sleep well. I don't do anything really extreme in terms of physical activity beforehand. I have to think about that. Like, oh yeah, okay, so this interview or this debate is this date. So I can't work out until after the debate because if I work out, then that'll interfere with. It's just things that people don't have to think about. I have to think about a lot. So I wanted to bring that up because I was just thinking about that before I went on the interview because I'm trying to schedule one with someone. I don't know if it'll actually go through, but yeah. So in terms of experiencing emotion causing me pain, it still does happen to some extent, but there's many ways in which I could reset the structures of my body, like my ribs and stuff. I use a heating pad. I'll lie down on a heating pad with a Denerol. I don't know if anyone knows what a Denerol is, but it just goes under your neck. You lie down on it, yeah, and it's supposed to basically fix your neck posture over time, or at least put your neck into a position that it's supposed to be when you do have optimal posture. Is probably the best way of putting it. And I'll do that, and I'll have the heating pad right around here on my back, and then I'll also lie down on it on my stomach. That can help a lot. The Denerol, if I push it into my sternum, that can help a lot. If I lie on the Denerol, if I lay my back on the Denerol, that can also help, depending on the position. I have a Shakti mat, which many people may not have heard of as well. Okay, so I have one, and that helps as well. It doesn't help as much as combining it with a heating pad though afterwards. That seems to be the best for me. But yes, the Shakti mat will help as soon as I lie down on the Shakti mat. For anyone that doesn't know, it's basically it's like an equivalent to the Indian bed of nails, but it's much more safe, and it's actually, no, I don't have it in here. I would just hold it up, but
can overlay up an image because my wife and I both use Shakti mats, but they have small circular discs which have protrusions, and you can fall asleep on them actually, and that's the amazing thing. When you first try it, you'll think, what's Eddie Garrick talking about? This is quite painful, and it should be. But then your body just adapts, and your ascending and descending pathways work together, and before you know it, 6 weeks later, that mat that you couldn't lie on for maybe 2 minutes, you'll be lying on for 20 minutes, and someone will have to wake you up. And it's a great pain modulator, I think. And it's Shakti, by the way, for people listening on the audio, SHAKTI. They are the best. There are impersonators on Amazon, very cheap versions. They're not as good. And I've had people actually say that to me. There's another thing I think we've got in common. I think we've got this in common as well, actually, which won't go into the stem enhance. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mentioned this again at the end of the first part, and I made sure to emphasize that I wasn't trying to make the entire interview a plug. It was just me sharing my experience. But basically what happened is whenever I discovered Bart K in August of 2022, I watched a lot of his videos, and then I came across the fact that he promotes a product, and I thought that was very interesting because I was like, well, you're talking about the carnivore diet not requiring any supplements, so what is a supplement? I mean, why are you selling a supplement? More so, my train of thought was, okay, well, if he's promoting a product that he says is a supplement after saying that this carnivore diet doesn't require supplements, then this product must be really good. So let's look into it. That was really what I was thinking. And I didn't look into it too much. I actually did a really cursory review of his information on the product, and I was sold immediately because it was a time of desperation, and I found a figure, Bart K, being someone that I just trusted a lot more than anyone that I'd come across. So I was like, I'll take it with a grain of salt. I'll put trust in him. And then later on, I'll just base what my opinions are off of my experience. And so I went into it not really knowing too much about it. And I'm very clear about that. I learned more afterwards, after the fact. So this was in 2022. I got the product and started taking it in August, maybe late September. And within 1 month, the acne I had for years, I had acne on my back and shoulders, which many people have a problem with that, especially when they're teenagers. And, I was 18 at the time. And I also had it all over my forehead, and then like one here or there. For years, I had that. No matter what I tried to use to get rid of them, it never actually happened. Which is usually because those things are very superficial treatments. You're not getting to like the deep roots of it. But within a month, all of that was completely gone, and I haven't had an actual significant return of that. Well, I mean, here and there, maybe it's because I'm still young and everything. I'll get like one little tiny one right there, and it'll go away within a day. So it's like, it doesn't really matter anyway. But it's very rare. It seldomly occurs. And that was my first experience. That was within a month. And I went, okay, that was still significant enough for me. And the reason for that was actually because, once again, I was going through that for a year. But also it was because acne is a manifestation of inflammation. It is. And I was thinking, wow, I'm so inflamed. Like, because of the treatments, they initiate even more inflammation. You would think that it would be much more difficult then to get rid of something like that if it's also another manifestation of inflammation. And within a month, I had that happen. Now, I'm extremely objective and fair. I also started the carnivore diet in August. So who's to say which one of those is the direct result of it, or if it was a combination of the two? I believe it's probably a combination of the two. But I do want to say that once I started taking it, it was associated with that. Now, that's maybe not as compelling, so let me get into further stories, because this stuff is the really significant stuff. I had no negative effects with Stem Enhance Ultra. It seemed to work for me, so I kept taking it. And then what happened is, once I started up my channel and everything, since I was wanting to promote the product, at the very least, Stem Enhance Ultra, at the time, I wasn't even able to try the other products yet. I was trying to raise money. I was trying to get money to actually buy the products. Well, eventually I did that, and I basically got all of the Cyactive products. So there's a Cyactive joint, there's a Cyactive, the prototypical one, the original one, and then there's a collagen active one, and that's all of them except Hydra Active, which at the time I hadn't bought yet. And I took all of those at once at one point. So yes, this is a combination thing. I didn't start with just one of them. I took all of them at once. I'll explain why that doesn't really matter, though, in my opinion, in just a second. Within a few hours, I was working on the computer, and usually I have inflammation in my ribs, like I said. And I actively felt, whenever I was sitting in the chair, me sinking in more than usual. It was happening like in live time, and I was like, what is going on? And I went to shower later, and that relaxes my muscles even more, and I was slouching over more than I'm used to doing. And I was like, what is happening? And it hit me. I was like, well, the only difference is that today I took the Cyactive products, the collagen active, the Cyactive joint, and all that stuff, and I could feel the difference immediately. Like the splint, was shrinking, And so a lot of people may think, well, you're slouching more, this bad thing. Well, what that tells me is the inflammation was going down. The inflammation in my ribs was going down, like, actively. I was watching it happen in the chair, and then later on I was putting two and two together. I continued taking that, and I recorded a video, I think the next day. And I remember the video I remember the video was on Glucose Goddess, which many people have also heard of. And it's called Insulin Resistance, though, on my YouTube page, if you want to check that out. It was pretty funny, because I remember sitting in the chair and I was like, I'm like far more reflexive with my responses than I usually am. I haven't had this degree of cognitive, clearance that I do right now. And I was like, man, I'm sold. But the thing is it takes a lot to sell me on something, even after it works. So I kept saying to myself that I'm sold, but I still was like, it sounds like too good to be true almost. Until the final anecdote that I have to share is, whenever I had enough temerity to start working out again, I use the X3 bar, which again, I'm not even an affiliate, so this isn't a plug, but just if a side note, that's the only thing that I'm actually able to use besides regular calisthenic, like using a pull-up bar, that'll get me to be able to work out, because all of the other stuff puts too much strain on my joints. So the X3 bar is the best for me. So anyone else that has joint issues, I can attest, I can vouch for the fact that the thing does work as well. But whenever I started to do that, even though it does put far less pressure on your joints, you're still fatiguing a muscle. And that being said, if your muscle is fatigued, it's the only thing that your body is, it's your body's last resort for stability of an unstable joint. And so afterwards, I was completely debilitated, and it was really discouraging because, I'm making such progress. And then after I work out for one day, I go, this is all it takes for me to like be rendered useless again. Like this is ridiculous. And so it was really, really like, I was despondent afterwards. I wasn't, it was very, it's just a blow to the stomach a little bit. It's like, oh, you're still here, but that day, I remember that day, my Cyactive products, well, all of the Cerule products had arrived, my replenishment, I was a little late on that, on getting them reordered. Well, they came in that day and I took all of them. And later that day, my girlfriend went to the store, and long story, but she had to have me pick her up, for some reason. Well, I remember getting really, really angry about it. Not at her, angry at the situation, because I was like, the one day that I'm like debilitated after working out, I have to drive. The one thing that I didn't want to have to do is leave the house. And now I have to drive all the way across town and then pick her up, go into the store, pick her up. So I remember though, I was driving there and I was like, I feel a little better though, at least. And I attribute that usually to, I shifted, my ribs shifted in some form or another. So that's why. Well, I remember I went in there and I was like speed walking through the store, and there was no inflammation, because I can usually gauge that by how well I'm able to shift a joint around. Because again, as the splint situation, the phenomenon, and I met up with her, and then we were walking out, and I was like, I looked at her and I went, dude, this stuff works. Like, I know now, I'm like definitely sold. This stuff works. The fact that within 2 hours, I went from not being able to get up off the ground to being able to speed walk through a store and actually have a smile on my face too, like actually be able to be in a good mood. I was like, man, no, that stuff works. This stuff works. So those are just my anecdotes to say that this stuff works. I mean, technically that's a, you could say that's a cause and effect claim, but no, in reality, what we do say is that the Stim Enhance Ultra product especially, but all the other products too, they do exactly what they say they do. That's what we mean by they work. The Stim Enhance Ultra product absolutely does cause the release of your circulating stem cells, or your endogenous stem cells in your bone marrow. It does exactly that. And we do know that stem cells can differentiate into effectively any cell in the body that is in need of repair, except for sperm and egg cells. That's what we know. So as for the other products too, it functions as basically ibuprofen, like, except for, it doesn't have the side effects that come along with ibuprofen, like kidney damage to some extent, a lot of times. So it works on the COX and LOX enzymes and those pathways. I think maybe is more selective in terms of which ones it does, like, because there's different types of COX enzymes, like there's COX-1 and COX-2. I have to look into that again, but yeah, that's what it does, and that's been my experience. I've had, if I can say one more thing about it, I had the Hydroactive one. I do have it next to me. If anyone's wondering why I keep looking over here, I'm looking at them. The Hydroactive one is something that it has magnesium in it, so it's hard to pinpoint which one I think is more associated with the effects that I was having. But after I would take it, I also felt whenever I was standing, I remember one specific moment where I was standing, and after I drank the Hydroactive, it was within a couple minutes, I felt, again, the same phenomenon where the splint feeling, where I'm like more starchy and stiff than I otherwise am or should be. I felt my chest sort of starting to cave in a little more, and I felt the muscle twitching occurring. It was almost like it was relaxed. It was releasing. And I was like, Well, that's interesting. Again, it's associative. Who knows what was going on, but it was associated with me taking the Hydroactive supplement just a couple minutes prior. So
Yeah.
again, magnesium we know will also act on muscles. So who's to say it was the magnesium or the Cyactive formula that it also has in it? Either way, it was I believe that it was the product. So, just that's a little side note as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't be definitive about anything, can you? Because there's so many
Exactly
in the world. But you can also report what happens. I mean, going back to the dry needling, actually, I rarely talk about this. I don't push it on people, but I can remember a few patients saying, "Is this a placebo effect?" And I would say, if you walk out with less pain, does it matter? Does it actually matter?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, I've had this for 6 years. If you can get rid of this pain, I will pay double what I'm supposed to pay or whatever." They'd always be jokey about it. I say, "Look, if you're interested, we can go into it. But I tell you what, you believing it's going to work is definitely going to be a positive. I promise you."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's studied. I said every time they study a pharmaceutical, if they test it against placebo, many of those people in the placebo group get better. So it's actually scientifically tested that it's a thing. So I'd always argue with that. And the mechanism of action can be described, but actually, in the end, does it matter? If you feel better, and that's how I felt with the Stem Enhance, I took it, and it was actually fortuitous that due to financial problems, I had to stop. And it was only when I stopped did I realise how good it was. And I went back on, and then because I'd gone back on, I wanted to be a good scientist and come off it again and see if it really was that. Now, super coincidence. I could have been wanting it to be better, but things happen, and this happened to me a couple of days ago. I play football. I'm 60, right? I still play soccer 3 times a week, and on Wednesday night, huge injury. I got basically decked. Someone put their studs into my ankle, and I said to my wife that night, "I'm going to wake up and that's going to be really painful, I think that's because there was quite a big lump there." And I woke up the next morning and there was nothing. I'd forgotten about it because I'd slept well. And then I just went out and did, my normal things. And it was only like the middle of the day. I said to her, my ankle's really good. Now it can't be placebo because I wasn't even thinking about it. I'd forgotten about it. But I guarantee at age 23 or 25, whatever, that would have still been around. So I think that's pretty powerful personally. Certainly at my age, I'm an old fart. I shouldn't recover that quickly. I can't believe it. So to me, it's really valid. And N equals 1 like that, and like yours, is really valid because in the end, if there's 1,000 people saying that, that's actually data, isn't it? I mean, that's what it is.
Yep, the plural of anecdotes is data. Yeah, that's a quote that I actually put in my book. I can't remember. It was from some professor. I think it was at UC Berkeley. Can't remember his name. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, anyway, I'm not going to get into the next bit. So, right. It wasn't.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
I know that this is an interview on your end, but I wanted to ask you, since you're qualified to do dry needling and you said you've done it, are you talking about the superficial dry needling or are you talking about the actual vertical pecking technique that I was talking about? Have you done that before?
I can do both, but most people wanted a more superficial treatment.
Okay.
But yeah, so extra long needles are really hard. They're really hard to guide, and I didn't particularly enjoy it because it took a lot of what's the word? Not patience, but you got to be very dexterous. You got to be absolutely certain.
Yeah.
But I think it was one of the best things I ever did. I really enjoyed that because when I was 23, and I'm trying to get onto your channel because I want to tell my story, but here I share a little bit. And when I was 23, I was shown a very convincing image and told I'd be in a wheelchair by age 50. And it just didn't, no pun intended, it didn't sit well with me because it just didn't feel like that was the thing. And yes, I could I've got eyes. I could see my hip. I could see that. And I, it was pretty painful. I was in a lot of pain, and I was stretched off a squash court and I couldn't move at all. I was put on laughing gas to sort of relieve it a little bit. Long story short, I went out of hospital. I discharged myself, a very hot head actually, but I still felt this isn't quite right. And I went to see a chiropractor who was this fragile old gentleman who was recommended to me, who you really wouldn't think could pick up a pen, let alone a person. And within 20 minutes, this pain, which was excruciating, where every step was gritting my teeth, I'm going to get to this osteopath, had gone completely and utterly. And then from there, I did my own research, and he actually said to me, "You know what you're talking about. You should do this. You should do it yourself." And it just was in the back of my mind. And then I went on and did my life and did other things. And then when I got to my 40s, when everything was going south, I still believed in high carb, and I was an advanced personal trainer. I think I was doing right. I had to go to an osteopath, a different one, complete one, because I was in a different part of the world. And I went in and I told him what was wrong. Not in a big-headed way, but sort of like, I'm going to save you a bit of time. This is wrong. Da, 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 da. And so he still examined me. He said, no disrespect, but I will try and make my own diagnosis. So anyway, he went, yep, you're absolutely right. We did the treatment, and he said, you really should get qualified because that's quite hard to diagnose. So I said, okay, I will do that. So I signed up with this quite big company, actually, and they train the physios at people like Liverpool Football Club, Manchester City Football Club, these top sports people. They train their sports science people. So absolutely brilliant training. And, I got the advanced certificate there doing that, osteopathic spinal manipulation, which is like cavitation, high velocity movements and stuff. And they got me into the medical acupuncture because this is me. I just want to go further. I want to know stuff. And not only that, I want to be able to practice it and see it working, which is why I've ended up as a qualified phlebotomist, honours degree in physiology, health sciences, a specialist practitioner in obesity and diabetes, because I want to know the stuff. But then in the end, it's still about results, Eddie. That's the thing. When I went out with my big shiny qualification to talk to diabetics, I learned from the people because I still believed in high carb, and the ones that were doing well were ignoring me. So and I just said, what are you doing, guys? What are you doing? And they're like, well, we're not eating many carbs. So in the end, you can do all the studies and stuff, but until you actually see it work in a really basic situation, like you said yourself, that was your experience. Well, that's what we're lacking now. Everything's evidence-based, and evidence-based is absolute bunk now. This Australian study that type 2 diabetes is caused by low-carb diet. Well, when you look at the study, the lowest carbohydrate diet that they've got there is 37.5% carbs, which equates to 185 grams. So that's evidence-based.
Yep.
And it's rubbish, right? Clinical experience-based is me saying, I had 10 people walk in and they're off their diabetic medications after 6 weeks. What's better? I tell you, I know what's better. You know what's better because you went through all that I'm ranting now, but you went through all the mainstream misdiagnosis, but still good people, not nefarious, I think. And then you hit on the thing that worked, and serendipity or research, whatever it is, you've now got into the point where you understand it inside out, back to front, I think, because it's your personal experience. When you've lived something, you're the expert because you live it. You live it 24/7. I'm sure the finest minds in the world, that, for instance, if you look at cervical cranial instability, unless they've had it, they don't really know what it's like to live with it because they don't live with it. Yes, they could tell you the mechanism, what's the best way to treat it, but they don't 100% understand it because you just can't. You can't unless you have it. So I think what you've done is just amazing. I mean, I love the way that, from the first interview, you said you laid on your back and thought, I've got to research this and setting up the channel, how you're really interested in all of it. You've written the book Contraindicated, I believe, which, oddly, these things, I'd never heard of that book. And then in the week, somebody recommended it to me. So, and they didn't know I'd interviewed you. So I think it's great. Well, do you feel there's anything else you want to cover? Because, like I say, I'm going a bit longer than I normally do. If you feel you've covered everything you want to cover, that's fine. But if there's anything you want to add, then I'll be more than happy to hear about it.
I think I covered everything. That was my only question, and it was only for you. It was just for you, but yeah.
If it's boring, yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a really great subject, and I haven't practiced for over 5 years, but it was something I was really proud to do, and it wasn't something I promoted a lot because it's still quite invasive. You have to get a lot of licensing, so the local government have to come around once a year and check what you're doing, which was fine by me, by the way. A funny story about that, I suppose, is I was at a practice and I had a room basically at the back there where I would do both the osteopathic manipulation and also the dry needling. And the front desk came to me and said, look, there's a guy, he's booked in to see you next week to do your license, to renew your license, but he's just up the road. Can he pop in now? And I was like, yeah, you can pop in now. So he popped in now and he said, do you know what? I've done this job 25 years and I've never met an acupuncturist who is happy for me to just turn up. So I should give you your license now because you must be very confident that you do everything right. And I'm like, yeah, I can't understand why you wouldn't. But I also understand if you're being checked, you go around, you make sure everything's perfect and stuff like that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I enjoyed the successes. And the best thing about it was because of the situation where I was at the back room, there was a reason I mentioned that. The waiting room would have people doing other things in that clinic. And I would have a patient that would walk through and they'd literally have their neck like this. Oh, I've been in A&E this morning. Nothing can work. Oh, it's really painful. Can I see Stephen? Like this, and like, yeah, come through. And 20 minutes later, that person would be coming out. Woohoo! It's gone. I can't believe it. It's brilliant. So I used to get so much business by just what people saw. They saw the before and after. And it really works. It does really work. Not for everybody. And there was times when, I'd have to say to somebody, this is not going to work for you. You need to go to hospital because this is a thing that needling is not going to make any difference to. Normally a crush injury, something like that. But it was a good thing to do. I'm glad I did it. It made me understand the body a lot more. The guys that trained me were absolutely top. Obviously, for friends and family, I still do treat. So, I can see people with a very bad Achilles tendon, and it's like, as long as they're family, I'll do it. I'll fix it with the needles. So, yeah, right. So I'll cut this bit out if you want, but I might keep it in just for people that want to stick around for an hour and a half. But no, it's been really great to have you on. Really great. Your story is amazing, and I hope you have a lot of success with your YouTube channel.
Thanks. You too. Thanks again for having me on for the second time. So